Hi, this is Peter Schweitzer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, with Donald Trump dominating Washington, D.C., progressives are looking elsewhere for inspiration, and they're turning to the Golden State, the state of California. But the problems with California are not just the progressive failure of their policies. It's corruption. When we think of corruption, we usually think of places like Louisiana and Chicago. We better start thinking about the Bay Area and Los Angeles. That's our subject today, corruption in California. Eric Egger, you're the co-host of this program. Thanks for being here. And when was the last time you were in Cali?
I was in California a little bit ago, maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, and I wouldn't call my time there corrupt. I also feel like a need to stand up for the reputation of Louisiana, who for some reason caught astray in your introduction. They have nothing to do. They're just sitting there like their senator's doing a good job. Today is focused on California, and I would say if you're looking for inspiration for future progressive leadership in California, you might call that particular position to be foolish, Peter. What do you think?
Yeah, that would be a good word for it. We're going to talk with two authors today of a book. Now, everybody on the podcast realize this is not a typical book interview. Usually books are sort of regurgitating stuff that you already know. We're talking with the authors of Fool's Gold, who have written a terrific investigative look at California. Susan Crabtree and Jedd McFatter are the co-authors. Susan is the senior correspondent for RealClearPolitics, and Jedd McFatter, of course, is the director of research here at the Government Accountability Institute. A lot of ground to cover. Why don't we start, first of all, with the head honcho, the numero uno of California, and that is Gavin Newsom. Susan, tell us what we need to know about Gavin Newsom. I know you've got some interesting stuff in there about his ties to PG&E and some of the corrupt elements of his behavior. Tell us about Governor Newsom.
Well, everything about Governor Newsom is performative, not performance-based. Everything has been handed to him on a silver platter, from his entrance to college admissions, to his winemaking career, to his political rise. He's basically just performing. He's kind of making it up as he goes along. And that's why he can say that he cares about the California wildfire victims, even though he's taken so much money from the utilities that caused them. He's just acting. He's going along and acting the whole time.
Well, and it's interesting on the PG&E story, it's not just the typical story of campaign contributions, right? I mean, there's actually money that PG&E gave to Gavin Newsom's wife for the purposes of some projects. Tell us about that.
That is one of the most egregious things that we discovered. So PG&E is one of several utilities in California that have a monopoly, and people don't realize that they are so close. They're in bed with the California Democrats, giving so much money. They've given $2.5 million to Gavin Newsom. When it comes to PG&E, they are responsible for the worst California wildfire, the most deadly in the state's history, the Camp Fire in Paradise that just wiped out that town, killing 85 people. So Gavin Newsom has taken PG&E money and his wife, $700,000 total. And his wife was so close to PG&E that she has these gender justice films that she's made. She has documentaries that talk about basically promoting transgender ideology. And they come with a curriculum that she sells to schools, 5,000 schools across the country. So they're exporting their values to the rest of the country, and they make a tidy little profit, $1.4 million. PG&E gave money to her films and actually held a screening in the downtown San Francisco skyscraper for PG&E headquarters for one of her films.
So if you're keeping track at home and you're wondering why California is losing residents hand over fist, like to the point where they regularly run out of U-Hauls, we've talked about this before, because people are trying so quickly to get out of California, the fact that utility companies who get money from the Biden administration and are responsible for the wildfires are paying for screenings put on by the first lady that promote a transgender ideology. Like that's like a thing that happens in California on a regular basis. Those are among the revelations in this terrific book. Jedd McFatter, you are a first-time author. You also work it's kind of talk about, we can't give Gavin Newsom too hard of a time about being performative because Jedd is literally in the next room, just in front of a screen. But we're going to interview him like he's like, hey, Mr. McFatter, very nice to meet you. Like I may yell at you during this question.
Right. Go ahead.
But your research has been so good and you're so passionate, you're so smart. And you've done such a good job with this book. But to the point about being performative in terms of what Gavin Newsom does, I think no story in the book better underscores the performative and deceptive nature of how Gavin Newsom governs himself and the state than the research you've done about his statue. We were told as Gavin Newsom was lieutenant governor that like there was this organic desire to promote what a great job he's done and like make a statue. But your research tells a very different story.
Right. Well, so yeah, about around 2015 or 16, there were some news articles that came out that talked about the bust, this bronze bust that was coming of Gavin Newsom. And Gavin kind of shrugged it off. He said it's kind of awkward to talk about. He said he didn't really know who was behind it. But what we found was that in 2016, the behested payment system for California shows that Gavin Newsom actually solicited, tax-exempt funds from 3 different organizations to help fund either the creation or the installation or the maintenance of his own bronze bust. And 2 of the companies that donated money were his own actual companies. So, I mean, and so in that sense, he funded, his own statue.
That's the cool thing about California. The wildfire causing utility companies pay for transgender films, and Gavin Newsom's own companies pay for his own statue. Like that's what we're doing out there.
Yeah, that's the performative, as Susan said. I mean, I think that's a good term for it. Susan, how is it in California that this behavior doesn't seem to get challenged or people don't seem to care about? I mean, the mismanagement of the fires, the sort of craziness of the gender ideology. Why do you feel that California continues to move in this direction despite some of the horrendous things that are going on there?
Well, I've talked about this with so many people. This is a great question, Peter. I don't feel like first of all, the legacy media out here is cozying up, and they are part and parcel of the problem. They cozy up to the Democratic establishment. There's super majorities in both, like I said, both chambers of the legislature. It's basically one party rule. When you had a recall, you had several attempts to recall Gavin Newsom, the best being after the one that was most successful, being after his French Laundry dinner that was so outrageous during COVID. And we actually found a PG&E connection to that dinner as well, with a top lobbyist benefiting from this bailout that Newsom was going to do, as an aside. But the issue is people aren't reading the newspapers out here, and there's one party rule because there's been so much immigration into the state that now Democrats control. It's a basically 2-to-1 ratio between Democratic registered voters and Republicans, and there's a growing independence movement. So I have some hope, and we have had some hope last year. Basically, Donald Trump gained about 2 million voters from his first run in 2016 in California, at 6 million for Donald Trump and 9 million for Kamala Harris, but still not enough scrutiny on the major politicians running the state because of the death of local media, and the legacy media is not doing it. They just want the access journalism.
Now, you mentioned, of course, the infamous dinner that he had in the height of COVID. You also have a story in the book about effectively a jailbreak that Governor Newsom initiated during COVID. Tell us about this scandalous action. I had not heard of this before.
This is incredibly disturbing. We were in touch with a whistleblower who was actually the one keeping track of all the COVID deaths in the prison system across and the COVID just infections. And Gavin Newsom was saying, we need to empty these prisons. There is a Supreme Court decision back in 2011 that said you need to either build more prisons or empty some of your prisons. They're too crowded. Well, guess what? Of course, Gavin Newsom chose to empty the prisons. And during the pandemic, he was using COVID as an excuse to do so, to the tune of 70,000 prisoners they let out. They said that they were worried that it would be a death spiral inside the prisons, that these people, they would cause them to die. But guess what? Our whistleblower tells us that there was a higher COVID infection rate and death rate outside in the community. And if you tip away, we found that it actually was these inmates were 6 times more likely to die in the regular community than in the prison system. So it was all a big fabrication on Gavin Newsom's part. I guess that's putting it mildly. But now we wonder why there's so many smash and grabs across California. And we believe that has something to do with it. 70,000 hardened criminals, some of them violent.
Yeah, you're also seeing resignations, Susan, as you pointed out elsewhere, of prosecutors throughout the state. And I think it's one reason why you've seen an uptick in crime. And I think it's not unfair to connect that to the 70,000 prisoners that Gavin Newsom helped facilitate the release. Now, Jedd, we talk about, Gavin Newsom. He's been in the news lately. He came out and sort of maybe said, oh, yeah, the trans issue is not necessarily something that we as progressives should be talking about. And some people say, oh, wow, is he kind of breaking with the progressives? One of the things you point out, Jedd, and you've spent more time on this than anybody I know, is Gavin Newsom's real constituency hasn't necessarily ever been like the cultural progressives. In some ways, it hasn't even necessarily been Californians. You could make an argument that Gavin Newsom's actual constituency has been the Chinese. He's recruited them to the state. He's done business with them. What's the most alarming thing you found, and you report for the first time in this book, about Gavin Newsom's ties to China?
All right. Well, I think that the thing that stood out the most to me was that when he was mayor, he co-founded a nonprofit that basically operated out of the mayor's office. It was called China SF. And the goal was to recruit Chinese business and investment to the Bay Area. Now, his co-founder of this group was a Chinese billionaire with known ties to the Communist Party, and his businesses have been known to be connected to Chinese criminal gangs known as triads. So that's who he founded this nonprofit with. And it operated out of the mayor's office of economic development, but it had 4 satellite offices in China, which is kind of odd in and of itself. But the problem is these companies that he brought in, a lot of them turned out to be filled with like criminals. So I'll give you an example of 2 companies real quick that were recruited in through China SF. One is a company, ZNL Properties. It was a company owned by a former Chinese government official. So they were recruited in. They got involved in various large development projects that kind of fell through. But then a few years later, it turns out the owner of this company was criminally sentenced to pay $1 million fine for bribing some close associates of Gavin Newsom. And then what we also find is that a couple years prior to that, ZNL made an anonymous contribution to Gavin Newsom's campaign of over $20,000. That's one example of a kind of company that he recruited in. Another one's Oceanwide Holdings. It's a branch of a state-owned Chinese real estate company. They were also, brought in through this program, and they've had a lot of these large development projects that have also failed. But the thing about this program that really was shocking to me was that Gavin Newsom actually stated that the Chinese businesses that are coming through this program, that they would help walk their permits through the entire bureaucracy. And you can just imagine, if you're a developer in California, it's notoriously difficult to get projects done, to get them started, to get them finished. A lot of times you have to pay permit consultants to expedite it and everything, but yet, foreign Chinese companies they just walk them through the whole bureaucratic process. And I mean, to me, that just shows, what he cares about the most.
Yeah, how about that, right? Regular Californians can stay home during COVID, unless you're in prison, in which case you can go free. And, if you're a regular developer, you wait in line. But if you've paid to be part of the whole China SF program, which he's co-founding, then he literally brags about the fact that he's going to walk you through the line. That is, that's what is so shocking about Gavin Newsom. That's the person the progressives are turning to for leadership. But Gavin Newsom's not the only Californian that they talk about in the book.
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, there's a great story about Gavin Newsom and a wine tasting that he had in China. People have to read the book to get that. But Susan, of course, Gavin Newsom's on the cover of this book, but you've got some other familiar figures as well. You've got Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris. You've got Adam Schiff. What else on the corruption side can you tell us beyond Gavin Newsom of the sort of things that they're facing in California and maybe in America's future if we follow California as our inspiration?
Well, it's incredibly disturbing to me that Kamala Harris now is sort of signaling that in the Politico article last week that she's going to be running for governor. And so that she's trying to sort of reboot herself from the terrible losses last year. She was also involved in not prosecuting PG&E. Every single attorney general that had the chance to prosecute PG&E didn't do so. There's all incredibly a list. We have a whole chapter full of policies that Californians have tried to export across the whole country, including paying for immigrants' health care and even giving them a subsidy to buy a mortgage subsidy. This was being attempted so this took place in California. Gavin Newsom at the beginning of last year, when he was running about a $45 billion deficit, they still went forward with their plans to give immigrants health care insurance across the state. And so then what did we hear? Pretty soon then President Biden wanted to do the same thing, wanted to add to the rolls on Medicare. But if you go through the final chapter in the book, we go chapter and verse on these, everything from EV mandates to trans athlete policies to environmental policies. It's unbelievable how much gets exported from California. As Gavin Newsom likes to say, as goes California, so goes the nation.
It's worth pointing out that the Democrats and progressives, just from a political standpoint, have clearly learned no lessons. Because if you think about it, Kamala Harris became the presidential nominee when she was, as some would say, selected, not elected, to the top of the ticket when Joe Biden was forced to resign. And now, as there's talk that Kamala Harris is considering a run for governor, the reporting has been everyone else is getting out of the way. She is clearing the deck, and we got to give her a chance, because clearly that's what puts them in a position to be the most competitive when there is in fact no competition in a primary. But it just shows you that the past is prologue. But one story that didn't get a lot of reporting when Kamala Harris was running for president, because of the nature in which she was elevated. Jedd, you've known about this for a long time, and it's reported in the book. We talk about people who choose not to be prosecuted. Kamala Harris not only took it easy on the utility companies, but she took it easy on an even worse group of offenders, not just people that committed wildfire, helped contribute to conditions that created wildfires in California, but pedophiles.
Right. Yeah, this has been talked about in the past, but basically when she was district attorney and attorney general, she helped cover up, massive amounts of, priest abuse in California, where she chose not to go after them.
Yeah, it's a remarkable story. So I want to ask both of you to answer this. Where is this heading? I mean, California's got economic problems, right? I mean, with state budget deficits, they're not going to get bailed out by Washington, D.C., at least with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And you see this exodus of people. The super rich stay and the poor stay, but a lot of the middle class, upper middle class are leaving. Where does this go, and what's it going to take to separate it? Because the title of the book is Fool's Gold, which I think is a great title. I grew up in Seattle in the 80s. And it was the Golden State. It was where you wanted to go. It's where a lot of my friends ended up living. That's no longer the case. So we'll start with you, Susan. Are they going to abandon this? Maybe we're seeing a little bit of that with Gavin Newsom, some of the more extreme progressivism. But how do you clear yourself of all the corruption? You can switch positions on policy, but if your mode of operating as a politician is corruption with these, behested payments and with these circular deals, that's really a hard thing to extract yourself from if that's the way you're used to doing business.
Absolutely. And that's why we're having so many warnings in this book about what it would mean to have Gavin Newsom in the Oval Office, to bringing California ways to Washington. I feel like that the Californians are sort of waking up to this reality. Unfortunately, they have to do it. It seems like they have to do it the hard way, with the wildfires being Exhibit A in Los Angeles. We had these wildfires going on since 2017, year after year after year, but it hit a major lucrative area of California, one of the most lucrative. And guess what? Now everybody's paying attention. So we have a Karen Bass recall for the mayor of Los Angeles. That's going on right now. There's another recall of Gavin Newsom taking place, but I don't put much money. I don't want to put my money on that one, since he's survived so many, and he's out into 2026 anyway. That's why he's looking for a landing pad. But you're seeing some signs of sort of a shift to the right, both in Los Angeles and in San Francisco. So Los Angeles threw out George Gascon, their district attorney, in November. That was after San Francisco threw out both Chesa Boudin in a recall, their district attorney, and their mayor, London Breed, because they're fed up. People in California are absolutely fed up with the crime, the homelessness, the drug deaths, and now the wildfires. It's just a perfect storm to have the voters in California reevaluate where they're getting their information and the gross mismanagement taking place at the top. So I really think there's a shift. Whether it will be enough in this next election for Kamala Harris not to win, I'm highly doubtful, because the state is basically 2/3 Democrats. People like to say there's a D after their name. They just vote for it. They're not even really educated voters in terms of how these terrible policies are impacting their bottom lines, their household budgets.
Jedd, what are your thoughts? How do you clean up California? You've studied corruption for a long time. Is there any hope?
Well, it's a big problem. Last year, New York Times reported 576 public officials in California were charged with some type of, public corruption charges. And I don't see that going away anytime soon. But I think the big problem is how involved the politicians are with this. I mean, Gavin Newsom himself he hired or appointed more than 20 people, who were later found guilty of major crimes and ethical violations, crimes like murder, arms trafficking, things like this. And if politicians continue to do business with these types.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jedd, but it's just how casual you said that. The governor of California appointed people, arms trafficking, murder. That's pretty shocking.
Yeah, those aren't just crimes; those are felonies. Yeah. Like those are, murder's a tough one.
Right. Well, and he also took money from these same individuals. So it's organized crime, and that's where it also spreads to other states. Is organized crime that's kind of centralized in California, it kind of spreads to other states because there's so much money and resources there for it to spread.
What I heard Jedd saying is if what you want to say is happening to California is criminal, because it was this beautiful state and now it's become this like failed state. It is criminal, but it's not just because of the failed leftist policies. It's because maybe in part of the criminals that its leaders do business with and have appointed to key positions. And that's one of the takeaways from the book.
Absolutely. Well, it's a terrific book, guys. I applaud you for doing it. We know how much hard work it is to, get this material together. There are a lot of books out there these days. I've written a few myself. Eric's written them. A lot of people write books and they're what I call Google books, right? They just kind of do some basic research. They throw something together. That is not fool's gold. You break a lot of news in this book. Congratulations. The book is out today. I would encourage everybody to pick up a copy. Eric, your final thoughts on this topic.
That you're such a better person than me and so humble, because Peter's gone through this entire interview and not mentioned the fact that his name is also on the cover because he wrote the foreword.
Well, I did write the
and I'm not saying that's the best part of the book, but I'm saying that it is. But Peter Schweitzer gives literally his full-throated endorsement, as do we. We're very proud of it. We've helped because of Jedd and Susan. We're big fans of them and their work. And I do think that you will learn things about California. Those lefty relatives that you have that live in California, it's an excellent gift for them to send it to them. You send it to them and then a bus ticket to anywhere else. Come on, anywhere else, guys. Any other state's going to be better than California.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, we appreciate you, the audience, for listening. As always, we know your time is valuable. You can find out more about the work we do at thedrilldown.com. And of course, you can subscribe to this podcast wherever great podcasts are located. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.